I remember feeling like an upset stomach. I don't want to talk to my young kids about this. I completely relate. But when you think about if you give them the tools so that they know what to do if they see pornography, there's such a better chance that they will come back to you if it happens to them and say, hey, I think I saw porn. Can you help me? Because you've told them what to expect and how to respond. And that is so important.
Well, I'm about to say something that no parent, grandparent, youth pastor, leader, teacher ever wants to hear. And that's, it's time to talk to your kids about porn. Nobody wants to do that. But that is the title of the book that we're going to talk about today with the author, Greta Eskridge, who, Greta, you've been on our podcast before, and we've been waiting for you to finish this book. I remember we were at, I think, the Handicraft Fair last year, and you said you were writing it, and I think you were almost done. And I said, I can't wait till you finish it. I knew it was going to be good, but I told you that I was on a plane when we started reading it, and I was in chapter 4, and I paused, and I said to Brett, this book is really good. And so the title of your book, It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn, and then the subtitle, A Parent's Guide to Helping Children and Teens Develop Sexual Integrity. And so we're going to talk about this topic today. And so thank you for again coming on the Maven Parent Podcast. We've loved having you on, obviously, because we're having you on again.
Yeah, thanks for being on, Greta.
Oh, man. I'm so glad to be here, honestly. Like, you guys are fun to podcast with, even if we're going to talk about porn.
This is going to be the most, I guess, the funnest
That's not
podcast conversation about porn you'll ever hear, I guess is what we're saying. So Greta, this is her third time on the podcast. So when we look back at all of our podcast guests, there is no podcast guest who we've had on 3 times. This is how important this guest is. Mm-hmm. And I just want to throw that out there for other guests that we've had, you know,
just to rub it in.
Maybe I'll throw out some names like, hey, Jim, Sean, Tim. Yeah, we've had you on once, maybe twice, but not 3 times. Only Greta gets the 3rd time. So no, this is a important, vital subject, and you've written a really good book. And so we first thing I want to do is I want to tell parents to pause the podcast right now, go to Amazon or go to your favorite bookseller and look up It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn, because this is the parent's guide that we've needed, and every parent out there needs it. And hopefully by the end of the show, if you aren't convinced right now, by the end of the show, you will be convinced. Now, Greta, why don't we start with how you kind of took this on? And because it's a personal journey for you, there's a real personal element. So share with our audience kind of your personal journey into this topic.
Okay. Well, I was raised by Christian parents in the 80s and 90s, so we did not talk about porn. Mm-hmm. I think maybe one time it got mentioned when I was a teenager, probably stay away from it. And I was really fortunate never to have dealt with pornography, you know, as a kid, as a teenager, even as a young adult. It just wasn't part of my world. I think, you know, back then it was harder to find porn. It wasn't on a phone, like accessible 24/7 the way it is now. So it really wasn't until I was an adult, had 3 young kids, and my husband came to me, confessed that he had a porn addiction and he had had an affair. Mm-hmm. Both of those connected. Statistics just show that there's such a greater chance of increased unwanted sexual behavior in connection to porn addiction. And it was obviously devastating and shocking. I had no context for, you know, this man that I loved, respected, admired, had known since I was 18 years old, and that he would have this problem in his life. And he confessed, repented, and immediately began to seek healing, restoration. And I then went on my own journey because I felt like I needed to know what this was all about. How did he get ensnared? Like, how could it impact him in this way? And then also, how could we protect our kids? Because, like I said, we had 3 young kids. And then shortly after that, 4 young kids, 3 boys, 1 daughter. How could we protect them? And so that's when I began to learn about pornography and understand what an incredible evil it is, and to learn all the ways that I could. And then Erin and I, could begin to protect our family. And that's what started us on the journey.
Now, you mentioned in the book that you had this kind of sense that porn users were these creepy, maybe kind of in a dark basement. They're not regular people who are your husbands or your dads or your brothers or your pastors or your leaders or just
or your
people
kids.
or your kids or your own kids. And so you kind of had that view, like this is some creepy thing, but I'm sure that helped shatter. I mean, that own experience with your husband helped shatter that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how is that, because I'm thinking, all right, what is our view of human beings, right? Biblically speaking.
Right.
And there's this, obviously we're made in God's image, so we're incredible creatures, but there's also this depravity. And I wonder if that can help inform all of us in the fact that, hey, every human heart has this potential. We should actually maybe think more about it with those around us. To try and my goal in thinking about this is to say, how do we get people more motivated to address this issue? And is part of it, hey, our theology says there's depravity all around us. And even though we're redeemed and we're in Christ, we're forgiven of all that sin, the residue of sin is strong with all of us, and I wonder if our view of human depravity, the effects of sin, can help us, maybe alert us to, hey, this is not just the creepy folks.
Right.
This is all of us.
Yeah. It could happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like recognizing that pornography is so incredibly enticing and that it takes so little to be pulled into that darkness. And it shows that Satan is really using it to pull people who, even children who are, really like so susceptible, or a teenager, or even, a married dad who loves his family, loves his kids, goes to church and is a wonderful person that could get sucked in. Is such a powerful tool Satan is using. And so really understanding that, and understanding that nobody is immune to that pull that Satan is using so powerfully. That was helpful for me because it gave me so much more compassion for people who were pulled into this. But it also gave me like such a fire, because it's like, well, if it could happen to Erin, it could happen to anybody else. And I want to help other people. I began to think like, well, what about my sons and daughters when they grow up and they get married? Like, I don't want them to have to deal with this, or themselves, like to be the person who is struggling with addiction. It gave me a fire to want to help them in the present and in the future.
Okay. You just used a phrase. I think it's a phrase we should use again and again. Nobody is immune. I think when it comes to this topic, we have to say that from our church pulpits, in our homes. Dad is not immune. Mom is not immune. You, our kids, are not immune. Pastors are not immune. Our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, nobody is immune to this. It is so pervasive in the culture. And that is just maybe a way to help wake us up that we have to address this. Nobody is immune to this.
Well, and it does, you make the case in the book that, I mean, I made the joke at the beginning of the podcast, that nobody wants to talk about it, but you make a case in the book. It's bringing light to darkness when we talk about it.
Yeah.
And that is what I think, as I was thinking about your book, how do I convince parents to read a book about pornography,
Yes.
like how to address it with their kids? It's that we want to bring light to darkness, and we have to bring our theology into it and realize our sweet little innocent babies grow up to be like us and struggle with sin, and that none of us are immune. Yeah. And when you read your book, although I've read books about this topic and have seen some of the research, but reading your book solidified in me the importance of why we need to do it. So maybe let's talk about the problem first, and then I want to talk about how you help us with this problem. But help us to understand maybe the extent of the problem in our culture. I think we all know it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
Because it is so much more accessible.
Right.
But things like you talk about in the book about how young kids are typically exposed to it, how many of us view it and it not just being a male problem. So give us some of that. Hey, this really is a problem.
Well, I think the first thing that's super important to understand is that, and the reason I think Satan wants to use pornography to pull people down is because he's taking something God designed that is beautiful and good, which is the gift of sex, and he's distorting it and making it something that is not safe, that is hurtful, painful, and the source of so many evil things. So, of course, that is like where Satan wants to go to work. He wants to take something God gave us for good, and he wants to turn it into something that is evil. And if we start with like that frame of reference, then we can understand the ways that he's doing it by like exposing, a 7-8-year-old. The average age for first time exposure is between the age of 8 and 11 for kids to pornography. So imagine an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old, their first understanding of a sexual encounter is to see through pornography how damaging that is. Awakening sexual curiosity, far too young, having sex be something that is scary or shameful instead of something that is good and God-given, right? So already like working to like damage their hearts and their brains from a young age. And then you get to like teenagers, where teenagers are turning to porn to be like their guidebook for what sex should be. And so you have boys who think they should choke girls during sex. That's a tremendous problem that's happening right now. And be violent towards girls because that's what they see on the screen and that's what they think they should do. And then girls, they're terrified because they think, oh, this is what I have to expect. And they want either nothing to do with it, or they just say, okay, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I'm supposed to behave. So young kids, like teens, having this be what they're taught to expect, or even never being told that it's wrong, like that this is not the truth, which I think is even more alarming. And that speaks to culture, because culture is telling us porn is harmless, porn is funny, everybody uses porn, it's no big deal. And so if culturally that's what our kids are being told from a young age, and nobody is telling them anything different because we're all too afraid to talk about it, then that's what they grow up believing. And then how does that carry into their marriage? How does that carry into their parenting? What will the long-lasting effects be on relationships? So those are just a few examples. I could give you lots more, but that's a good place to start.
Yeah, well, I think it's, again, trying to make the case to get Christians motivated to address this issue. Part of it is understanding the extent of the problem. And you understand the extent of the problem, and it helps you to see that no one's immune.
Right.
And there are long-term consequences to this. So if we don't address it and the culture picks up our kids and takes them away on this particular issue, there are long-term consequences for our kid,
Yeah.
for their future families, for their future children. And so all of that helps us, I think, to see it. It's so vital that we address this issue. In fact, the way you put it in the book is it's almost like you got a choice here. And the choice is to shine the light in the darkness, or you say to let the darkness invade. And this is where we need to go on the offense.
Yeah.
Stop playing defense,
Yeah.
go on the offense. If you are not convinced this is a problem in our culture or even in your own home and family, then you've got to get your head out of the sand. I mean, we do. And I think I want to speak bluntly to this because it is such a pervasive problem. And when you look at all the data on this, I mean, gosh, 8 to 11 as the first exposure. And then how many, the rate of exposure between that and the age of 18.
Yeah,
and
it's like up to 90% for boys by 18. Like 90% of boys will have seen pornography before the age of 18.
Yeah. So 9 out of 10 of our boys in our typical youth group have viewed porn and probably viewed it multiple times, And so, so the extent helps us to understand and motivate us to address the problem.
Yeah. And that, I think, can help push us through the fear.
Yes.
And the fear is the big problem.
Yeah.
I think just as a parent, that can be crippling. And you talk about in the book, the toe curling conversations.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's just like, oh, I don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But a great part of the book is that you give us lots of conversation examples to have with our kids and ways to talk through it. And I love that. But when I got to, it's towards the beginning of the book that you suggest at age 6 that you have the first conversation about porn. I said out loud, whoa.
Yeah.
Because you read that as a parent and you're thinking, Greta, are you kidding me? But what's helpful is you give us the conversation to help us wrap our minds around it. Because what you're not suggesting is at 6 we have sex conversations with our 6-year-olds, but we start talking to them about this issue at their age and their level. But pushing through the fear, I think, is what I want to talk about first. And how do we do that as parents? I mean, you had to do that. You had to push through your fear and talk about it with your own kids.
Yeah.
So just internally in your own life, was it the research you were doing and that kind of helped equip you? I have to be different. You talk about getting a community around you too. Yeah. But what were some of the ways you pushed through your fear and had the toe curling conversations with your kids?
Well, this is the number one pushback I get from parents is that when I say you need to talk to your kids when they're young, like 6, 7, 8 years old. But I always try to remind parents that you want to talk to them like ahead of first-time exposure. So if first-time exposure is between the age of 8 and 11, statistically, like that means we have to do it at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So I'm not just pulling it out of a hat. Like there's a reason, even though I also know it feels so scary. And parents, we want to maintain that innocence, right? And in the book, I say like a parent really said to me, like, I'm having a hard time like telling my kid the truth about the tooth fairy. Like, how are you expecting me to talk about porn, right? Like this just feels too much for their little brain. And I remember feeling like an upset stomach. I don't want to talk to my young kids about this. I completely relate. But when you think about if you give them the tools so that they know what to do if they see pornography, there's such a better chance that they will come back to you if it happens to them and say, hey, I think I saw porn. Can you help me? Because you've told them what to expect and how to respond. And that is so important. You're not giving them details. You give them the least amount of details to stay the most safe. Like you're not saying any kind of details about pornography except for the most basic definition. Like pornography is people with no clothes on in movies or in books, or a picture or a movie, people with no clothes on. That's all you say. You're not giving them details, but just that little bit of information can help them stay safe. So I understand the fear, but I think the importance of, just like you would tell a kid, don't touch a hot stove because you will get burned. You don't think, well, if I tell them, then they will know about burns, and burns are terrible. Like I don't want them to know that. Well, of course burns are terrible. That's why we tell them don't touch the hot stove. Like the impact of them seeing pornography is horrible. So we have to tell them what to do. That's why we have to do it at a young age, as scary as it is.
Was there anything that helped you in particular with overcoming that fear?
Well, I mean, of course, personal experience, seeing, that neither Erin or I were really equipped to deal with what to do with porn exposure. And we had no tools really as kids or young adults. And so recognizing that could have been help. And I think another really important thing here besides the fear is the shame, because shame keeps us quiet. And for so many of us, we don't want to talk to our kids about porn because it is a painful or shameful subject in our own life, whether because we've used it, we're using it, or someone we love has or is. So we don't know how to talk about it. So I think addressing the fear and the shame, that those are tools Satan is using to keep us quiet. And so I just had to say, okay, I'm going to do this as hard as it is. But when I finally had the conversation with my kids, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, because to them, it was just another thing mom was saying for how they would stay safe. It wasn't so bad for them. It was hard for me, but for them, it was just like, oh yeah. And now I would say with our fourth kid, is so comfortable that sometimes, because we've talked about it so much, that sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, wait, you are way too comfortable with this conversation. We might need to put the brakes on a little. So it gets easier and easier.
Yeah. Well, and there's that's where I think it's helpful to think in terms of, a preemptive strategy along with a reactive strategy, because we don't want to merely react when it hits our kids. We want to preempt that. We want to lead, and I think in that we're leading the way for them. Yeah. Because we're going to have to react. There's going to be times where things just happen, and you have to react. But on this one, we can also kind of frame the conversation from the get-go, because the conversation about porn doesn't start with porn. It starts with human sexuality and God's design for sexuality. And God's design for sexuality starts with family and kids and marriage. And that starts with the cultural mandate that he's given us. It starts with Genesis 1. And so I think that's helpful for us to think about as parents, is that it's not merely, okay, now I got to talk to my kids about this particular issue, but all throughout my discipleship of my kids, I'm laying a foundation for them, a worldview foundation that is going to prepare them with the necessary framework to make sense of porn. And so it's Genesis 1, we're made in God's image. He makes us male and female. He gives us a command to fill the earth, multiply, and fill the earth. And then we're off. And Genesis 2, we become one as husband and wife to help do that. That's a beautiful story. Yeah. We need to be talking with our kids and helping them to see that from the earliest of ages. And we can celebrate that goodness. And then as we get into Genesis 3, talk about the fall of man. And okay, here's going to be the brokenness that we see. And it can start with those kind of more general conversations. And then as they get older, 6, 7, 8, we're having more specific conversations. So, and one thing that's so helpful is that you give specific questions and then verses to memorize, which I think is really good. So there's some really practical tools here to help any parent out there who's scared of this conversation to just ease your way into it.
I think that piece that you're talking about, Brett, and that you bring up in the book, Greta, is the conversations aren't just all negative. This is all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
It's God's story, God's design is better. And then, Satan and our own sin in our lives, we take what God's made, we twist it, we mess it up. And none of us are above the ability to do that. But I love that balance, because that's how I think we avoid the trap of just being the people who say no
Right.
to everything.
Yeah.
And we're explaining it's this better yes that we're saying to. And I think it's just oftentimes what young people don't hear enough in the church. It's connecting it to our worldview, our design, the goodness of it. Because the sin part, especially as our kids get older, everyone's aware of. It's more the beauty part that I think sometimes we lose.
Yeah.
And so that's you bring that up in the book and we talk about it here, but the not forgetting the beautiful part of the story.
Yeah. And this is where I think the concern that a lot of parents have of, if I even talk about this subject, I will strip them of their innocence. Well, what the biblical worldview tells us is that the conversation about sex itself is not going to strip them of their innocence, because sex is part of God's good design.
Yes, totally.
So unless and this is probably helpful for parents to think about, what baggage are you bringing into this? What baggage are we all bringing into this conversation, such that I don't want to address this topic. I think just the conversation will strip them of their innocence, because I want to say this conversation goes straight back to Scripture, God's plan for humanity. Sex is part of that original design. It's a good thing. So if you're talking about God's good gifts, you're not going to strip them of their innocence, right? When parents raise that to you, is there anything in particular you help them with, and in terms of, I'm scared I will introduce this to them, and then they'll go down that path, and I will have been at fault for this?
Well, I think that God designed us, we all know God designed us as sexual creatures. So there is going to be, at some point for every kid, questions about sex and sexuality. And I would rather be the one to have those conversations with them than Google or their friends or somebody else, anybody else. Like, I want to be the one to talk about it with them. So I would like that to be, even when it comes to the conversation of pornography, that I'm the one who has the initial conversation. They understand from me that it's dangerous, it's not good for them, and that I give them the information of what to do if they see it. Because the reality is, they could be doing an innocent search on Google for, a picture that they want to draw. Or maybe they are curious and they heard a word while they were on a sports team and they Google it. And then they find so much more than they could have ever imagined. Because like, you think about when we were kids and we wanted to find out something about sex, we heard a term. We could look it up in a dictionary, we could look it up in an encyclopedia, but there was a limit to what we could find. For kids now, there is really no limit, which is horrifying. And so we don't want them to go to someone else. We want them to come to us so that we're the ones having that conversation, because the reality is the loss of innocence, that the potential for loss of innocence is so much greater if we say nothing than if we have that conversation with them. Because again, we're not giving them details. We're just really giving them a plan for what to do if they see porn. As they get older, then yes, there are more details and there are more significant conversations that we're going to have. But especially those young years where parents are so concerned, we just give them the little bit of information to keep them the most safe.
Yeah. And this is where we can go on the offense, because we have the truth. And we can confidently move forward with the truth and play some offense, not just defense.
Okay, so let's talk about defense a little bit. And some dear friends of ours, their son's first exposure was, I think he was 10, but it was waiting to be picked up from a sporting event, and a teammate had an iPad.
Yeah.
And so he's just waiting there for mom and dad, and he sees the porn on the iPad. And so help a parent think through, okay, defense wise, what do we do? And you do talk about it in the book, but give us a glimpse of now what do we do? Whether it's they were searching something and
get advice for that parent. Let's say that's
parent.
the scenario.
The
that parent comes to you and says, "This is what happened.
This is what happened."
What would you say to that
How do we handle that conversation?
First, I would say to if this was my son or daughter, I am so glad you told me. Thank you. And I'm really sorry for what you saw. You are probably feeling like maybe scared right now or really uncomfortable. You might feel sad. You might also feel curious about what you saw, like have some questions. And I just want you to know that I am here and I'm going to help you answer. I will answer any questions you have. I love you. I'm not upset with you. If at all possible, if they're open to it, give them a hug, hold them, like have physical contact, because you want to like establish connection in that moment when they are feeling probably a lot of different things. And so are you. As a parent, I always invite parents to pray ahead of time, like not ahead of time in the moment, but ahead of time in years. Like, Lord, when this conversation comes, will you prepare me to be calm, to show the fruit of your spirit to my kid, gentleness, peace, kindness, like to show those things to my child in that moment when I might not be feeling those things. And then you're going to get into more detail, but you might even wait like a day to give them time before you're like, okay, can you tell me, was this the only time you saw something? Because you need to assess, like, this is the only time you ever saw this. Was it a movie? You want to know the depth of what they've been exposed to. And then in this case, you don't really need to like say, well, we're going to set up a tech plan in the house of how to keep you safe, because this was outside of his control or her control. But you could say, hey, if this ever happens again, here's what I want you to do. And it'll keep you safe from this sort of situation. If you see kids hanging out, just looking at their iPads, maybe go stand somewhere else. And let them know, like, they're not at fault. You love them. You're on their team. I think it's really important to address the curiosity issue because, again, God designed us as sexual beings, so they could have had a reaction to what they saw, like a physical or emotional reaction. And you want them to know they're not in trouble for that. But you also want them to know if they have questions or they think like, I kind of want to know what that is. I want to know more about it, not to go seeking it themselves, but to come to tell you if they have those thoughts. That's a big thing that parents, we don't want to imagine our 10-year-old would feel that way. But again, that's how God made us. It's just Satan wanting to thwart that and twist it.
Yeah. I'm thinking another defensive question, but including that affirmation that it is natural to have the curiosity and the desire, especially as our kids get older. Thinking about the conversation you would have when you find out your kid is viewing it and what kind of process you go through in reacting to that too. So maybe just even a quick one of that. So how would the conversation shift maybe a few years older now, and now you realize they've been viewing it on their own device, say they're 15 and have their own phone or computer. How would you advise a parent to walk through something like that?
I would start with that same conversation of like, I'm so sorry for what you've been seeing. And at that age, I would say, I want you to know this is not what God has planned for sex. What you've been seeing is not his good plan. And that is Satan trying to trick you and to fool you and to lie to you. And to then be like, it's tricky for this because the kid could be like, they could be mad and they're definitely probably going to feel shame. And, but they also might feel relief. I mean, there's so many ways that it could play out, but to let them know, again, you're on their team, you want to help them, you love them, and you're there for them. having that as your foundation is so critical. But then you're going to have to step into, okay, how long has this been going on? What's the depth of your use? Because they might need some additional counseling, because the reality of porn is that it can be so damaging that you might need someone else who has more expertise in this area to help your kid. And there's no shame in that. That is actually a gift to your child. And then again, beginning to figure out how you can change boundaries in your family for how they use tech. And that could be really hard because they might really push back. We all know, like, tech is so addictive without pornography being put into it. Like, just tech itself is addictive. So then we add pornography to the issue. So there might be some real pushback, and it might be really hard, but to stand your ground for what is best for your kid is something you have to do, but always start with that foundation of
and I want to encourage parents that it may require a strong approach where you have to take away the technology, and your kid will throw a fit often. It's the rare kid who's maybe in that teachable spot where they recognize and they're humbled enough to say, yeah, I need this out of my life. But often they may, get caught with porn. And then if you take away the device, take away the smartphone, the kid is going to be really upset. But for parents to have the fortitude to do that, to make those hard calls and to say that that's okay, even though lots of parents around us, lots of Christian parents around us wouldn't do that, would maybe even see that as, oh, that's kind of extreme. I mean, when you have knowledge about the damaging effects of porn, that's not extreme whatsoever. It only feels extreme because the culture around us coddles our kids, doesn't have strong boundaries, doesn't practice strong discipline. But when you think about the nature of this thing and the damage that can be done, taking your 15-year-old smartphone away for a while is not extreme. It's appropriate. And we've got to have the strength and the courage to make those decisions and know that even if our kid doesn't feel like we're doing it in love, we know we're doing it in love. It's protective love. And sometimes protective love is messy and it doesn't feel great. But it's one of the, I think, it's a deep act of love for our kids.
Yeah. Erin and I have talked about this, and he has said for him, when he confessed to porn addiction, like, he had a very strong motivating factor. Like, he did not want to lose his family, right? That's a great motivation to find like healing and to step away from this. But he has said, like, what motivation does a 15 or 16-year-old have? They're not going to lose their family. Like, it is harder for them to break free because there are less outside forces saying you will lose this, this, and this. And so as a parent, you're going to have to step, like you said, into a really uncomfortable place because they just, that prefrontal cortex is not developed enough for them to understand, like, this could impact you for the rest of your life if we don't help you right now.
Yeah. And that's where testimonies are helpful. Yeah. That's why, I'm thankful that you and Erin were willing to share your story on this and to kind of lay it out there for all to know, because those testimonies are so important for us to hear on the side of, hey, here's the incredible damage and the wreckage that can happen, but also on the side of, and here's the redemption. And you quote Ten Boom, not Corey, but Betsy, about how there's no depth of sin. You have to remind me the quote or get it word for word here, but just there's no depth of sin that can ever separate us from God and His love.
Yeah. There's no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still.
Yeah, and the quote's way better.
The thing that's so amazing is sharing a story like this. Like, Satan, even though we're on the side of redemption and like restoration, Satan still wants us to feel shame and to say, oh, don't share your story. Like, that's too humiliating. That's too vulnerable. It's too scary. What will people say? Like, he wants us to hide.
Yes.
And it's hard to say, no, we're going to. But like you said, like, we as believers need to share God's good work to encourage people who are in the dark place. And I remember we felt so alone. Like, we didn't know who to talk to. Like, this was 16 years ago. There were a lot less people talking about this. So it was incredibly lonely and isolating. And we just felt like, who do we even talk to? And to be able to be the voice for people who are in that place now, whether it's parents or people in a marriage, whatever, we want to say, like, there is hope on the other side. It's hard work, but there is hope because God is a redeemer.
Well, this is, I was reminded of what you're saying, Greta. Just actually this past week, Brett and I were at a conference of high schoolers, and I shared my testimony with about 500 high school girls. And afterwards, a lady came up and was saying, oh, thanks for sharing, and said something about it taking courage. And I said, I appreciate you saying that, because even though my daughter's 30, it takes courage for me to get up even in front of high school girls and admit what my life was like. But Satan wants us not to do that. He doesn't want you and your husband to share. He doesn't want me to share. He doesn't want any of us to share the sin in our lives, how God redeemed us, and we don't have to walk in shame. And this is where I think Christian community, this is what the church is supposed to do. It just strikes me, because if you're right about 90% of teenage boys, and I think in the book you said almost over 60% of teenage girls have seen porn by the time they're 18. And you said, Brett, that means 9 out of 10 boys in the youth group. And I was thinking, and how many of those parents know they have each other to talk to about it? Probably almost zero. But because it brings so much shame. And so we don't want to talk about it. But imagine if we had communities where we said, okay, I just found out my 16-year-old son, how did you guys handle it? With just the assumption that we're all in this fight together. And how freeing would that be? And how better equipped would we be if we knew, I'm not alone.
Yes.
I'm not alone. I just found out my daughter's viewing porn, and I know that people at my church can relate to this, and I know who I could go talk to. How that would just defeat so much of this struggle, even of the shame of it, of not talking about it, bringing light to darkness. If only we could do that.
Yeah. One of my favorite verses is from Romans 12. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think you are describing it exactly. Overcoming evil is, we're all going to talk about this, and we're going to say we are in it together to protect our kids together, to protect our marriages, our families. But Satan wants us to be overcome by evil and think, oh, I can't say this to anybody. I just have to hide because I'm afraid, I'm ashamed. This is horrible. Everyone will judge us.
Yeah.
But you described the exact opposite, which is what God wants us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think we necessarily want to, maybe we want we obviously don't want our kids to struggle with it, but also this is just the regular, consistent struggle of humanity with sin. It's always been the case. We see sexual sin all throughout Scripture, Old and New Testament. We're going to continue to experience it. And we also want to think, hey, we've got to work hard. We want to go on the offensive. We want to shine light in the darkness. We want to be protective, preemptive, all that good stuff. And at the same time, our kids are going to fall. We're going to fall. And so there's going to be the need for forgiveness and repentance. But all of that is opportunities for the gospel, right? And thinking of it that way too, it's not, okay, my kid starts viewing porn. Maybe they get addicted to porn. Thankfully, that's not the end of the story. And it's an opportunity for us to also shine the light of the gospel there and have our kids even experience the unspeakable grace of God. So there's those opportunities as well. And maybe that just gives us more courage to enter into this, knowing that we have every weapon we need in this battle, whether our kids ever see it or whether they get addicted to it and everything in between. The gospel and God's truth give us the weapons for this battle. And we don't have to be afraid.
Amen.
Which is why we want listeners, if you're listening to this podcast, we want you to share it with, well, first maybe your spouse. If you're married, share the episode with your spouse. Say, hey, can you listen to this? And then let's talk about it. Because you and I, Brett, we're talking about the good of us reading this book together and how even with us, it brought up a conversation. I guess I had never really told you the first time I had been exposed to porn. And we've been married 27 years. And I said to him, well, I've told you this. And he said, no, you haven't. And so it even brought about good conversation with you and I. But getting on the same page of this as husband and wife, if you're married, maybe you're in a small group of other parents. Share this episode. Say, hey, you guys listen to this. If you're a youth pastor, share it with the parents in your youth group. And maybe it's getting the book and saying, let's read through it together. And that can help, read Greta's words so then it's not you saying the things. And
true. That
can help defenses go down and open up conversation about it. It's a helpful way. Sometimes when we don't know what to do, this can be a spark for that. Hey, listen to this episode. Tell me what you think. Maybe we should get this book, kind of thing. So that is our hope from having you on, because I will, this book staying on my front bookshelf, Greta, because
everyone who walks into this house will see this book.
Can I tell you a funny story about
Yes.
that? Okay, so I have a lot of books about pornography in my personal collection.
I bet you
and
do.
so when in 2020, my husband had a lot of spare time because we were all home and he was working from home. So he built us a whole wall of bookshelves in our living room. And my kids said, Mom, can we put the porn section of the books in the back part of the library so it isn't the first thing everybody sees when they come in?
We want to have friends over, Mom. Could you please?
So that is the comfort level and discomfort.
Yes. The
having
funny
this book.
thing is when we got the book and it was sitting on our kitchen island here and our 13-year-old was like, Mom, what is this book? Like, it's time to talk to your kids about porn. But yes, truly. But it is a wonderful resource. And I told you before we started recording, I just have a million people I'm going to recommend this book for. But it is a great, I mentioned the conversations that you have in the book. You have important concepts for us to understand. You talked about discernment, intuition, body image. You talked about grooming, and you talked about erotic literature, which I think
a huge one.
Women, this is a part that we should particularly be attuned to because, of course, you talk about in the book, quote unquote, romantic literature and a lot of teen literature is soft porn in books that oftentimes we don't realize young people, these books are being pushed to them, or as women, they're being marketed to us because, it's a romance story.
Yeah.
And then it has soft porn in it.
And some are not soft porn. They're just absolutely pornographic literature.
Yeah. And so many things in the book that were helpful. Your conversation about objectification. That is a huge one and you shared a story about being a teacher and talking to your student about a picture he had on his folder that was completely inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I love the story because you start kind of lecturing him like, don't you know this is demeaning to women? And then you realize he doesn't know what demeaning means. He doesn't know what objectification is. So you took the opportunity and you had the courage to say to a student, which makes me think of anyone listening here, you might get an opportunity like that to even start a conversation about something as basic as objectification and being aware of that and how important that is. So the book is such a good resource because for me too, it just made me think this is a broad topic. It's not just about magazines or it's a big topic and there's all kinds of area and culture that it comes up that we need to think about it as parents, as leaders. And so really, I'm just so thankful for the resource, Greta. And I know you poured a lot of time into it. So I'm just so grateful you did.
Yeah. You cover so many good things and contemporary things. I was thinking about sexting also.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very obviously contemporary issue with today's kids. But Greta, any last words you want to share with parents out there on this topic in your book?
I shared the verse from Romans, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that's been like a battle cry for me because the temptation is to just want to bury our heads in the sand and say, either not my kid or it's just too much. It's too scary. But like you said, God is like, he's given us everything we need to be able to tackle even these really challenging, scary, heavy topics with our kids. And there's a verse in Jeremiah that I love that says, is anything too hard for God? And there's not. Like, even this subject that feels heartbreaking. And for many of us, many of the people who are listening today, like that feel pain and shame and heartache with this, like it is not too hard for God to help you and to help your kids. He is in it with you. And we can be in it together. So thanks for inviting parents to be in it together, because that's really what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good word. And we mentioned how you include verses to memorize. And I just want to, I guess, close by reminding us the power of God's word. And hey, yeah, there's the conversations we need to have. There's narrating these, the cultural things. There's all this wisdom. But front and center in this whole conversation is God's word. And I'm reminded of Psalm 119, verses 9 through 11. And I remember as a teenager memorizing these verses in my own struggles, and I was part of a great youth group, and a buddy of mine, we memorized this together as a way to remind us of the power of God's word as one of our primary tools in engaging the world. And the psalmist writes, how can a young man keep his way pure? By keeping it according to your word. With all my heart I have sought you. Do not let me wander from your commandments. Your word I have treasured in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. Through your generous financial partnership with Maven, you are having an impact on the lives of students and families across the country. To become a monthly partner, visit maventruth.com and click on the donate button.